as you know, every once in a while, I like to invite a few people over to the podcast to discuss what's going on in politics, to sort of sit back, relax, and take a load off. We may not always agree on everything, but it's a lot of fun and always a good conversation. So today I'm joined by three friends who I thought I'd invite to the barbershop, if you will, here in the neighborhood, to have a conversation on everything from the trials of Donald Trump and the trial for us as Americans that we're going through this crap, certainly the Supreme Court, and everything in between. And so I've got Tom Nichols, a staff writer at The Atlantic and a professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College. He writes about international security, nuclear weapons, Russia, and the challenges to democracy in the United States and around the world. We got Elie Mystal, the wild man, the beast, my man, is the nation's justice correspondent and the host of its legal podcast, Contempt of Court. He's also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. And Glenn Kirschner is a former federal prosecutor with 30 years of trial experience. He served in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia for 24 years. He hosts Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner, a podcast where he breaks down today's complex legal issues in ways that are very understandable. Tom, Elie, and Glenn here on the Michael Steele podcast at the barbershop, coming up next right after this. Welcome, everybody, to the Michael Steele Barbershop edition of the podcast. Yes, we are up in the neighborhood with a couple of fellas who need to get it fixed, to get it done, to get it shaped. Glenn and I kind of look at each other. He's looking at me like, what the hell are you doing? You got nothing up there to shape. What do you... I love it. Elie, Glenn, Tom, all of you guys, welcome to the chair. How's everybody doing? It's been a hell of an interesting time, hasn't it, fellas?
Well, I would just start by saying happy Thanksgiving to all.
Yeah.
I still celebrate the holiday. I understand that it has, connotations of whatever. I celebrate it in the Abraham Lincoln way. Hey, everybody, we're kicking some ass in the South. Let's have turkey. That's how I think of it.
I never looked at it that way, but I like it. Yes, I like it. Glenn, how you doing, babe? Good to see you, man.
Yeah, Mike, I'm good. I'm not here because I need a haircut, but you're looking a little raggedy. You can take that a little tighter, you know?
Look, my fro gets a little wild every once in a while.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be with you guys. And, I just clicked over from watching District Attorney Fani Willis give a fiery argument. And I know we're going to get there, but I can't wait to talk about seeing the kind of passion come out of a prosecutor that I have been longing for.
Excellent. Hey, Mark, it's good to have you in the neighborhood, man. You're still doing your clandestine efforts to save the world, or what are you up to these days?
I mean, Tom?
I said Mark. I don't know why the hell I said Mark.
I was like, is there
well, this is not water. Let's put it that way.
It's all right. It's getting to be close to the holiday. Well, I do need a haircut. Clearly, I can't get one here, but I need a shave. But I'm good. I mean, it's I'm tired of the news, but fascinated by it, and can't wait to hear more about. I didn't see the Fani Willis thing. I've been up to my neck in nuclear stuff for something I'm doing, and I'm ready for something less grim, even just for an hour.
So I want to start the conversation since you raised it, Glenn, and I want to because I think it's important in one sense to really kind of put a little bit of perspective on things. And so I want you guys to take a listen to a comment that I made recently on Eamon's show this weekend, related to what I think is happening inside our judicial system at the moment, and quite frankly, why at this point I'm I'm a little bit sick and tired, and maybe the respected attorneys on here can pull me back off of this ledge. But from my perspective, our judicial system is being bent over backwards right now to avoid getting mixed up in the politics. Is that's all Donald Trump is engaging in, is the politics, politicizing this process to the point where the judicial system seem almost inert, if not inept, at dealing with him. Let me sort of play this, and I hope it works here. I'm just going to use my best analysis that I can give you at this point on this situation with Trump and his attacks on the judges. Put his ass in jail. That's how you end it. That's how it stops. Now, yeah, people will be mad and they'll be upset, but there is no other person on this planet, and certainly not in this country, who would be given the kind of grace that Donald Trump has been given to run his mouth the way he has, attacking the clerks, attacking the judges, attacking the prosecutors personally, threatening them. We've shown the evidence when he does that, how his base responds. So if he was to continue in this vein, then use the system the way the system would be used against all of us on this show right now. Because you know damn well if any one of us said half of what Donald Trump has said, we would not be on air tonight. We would be in a jail cell. So tell me where I'm wrong. Because I think at the core of this, what we, Glenn, you talked about Fani Willis laying out the case in Georgia. Well, what is she laying out right now? Why is she laying it out the way she's laying it out? To make it very clear that we have a problem with this particular defendant. And he is a threat in more ways than I think the system is willing to acknowledge. So I give you a chance to respond to that opening salvo for me.
Yeah, so right now, Fani Willis is going against one of the 19 co-defendants, Harrison Floyd, for violating conditions of the release. He has threatened witnesses. He has posted things that are so obviously in violation of his release conditions that she's doing precisely what a prosecutor should do. She's filing a motion to have his release revoked. And, Michael, when you say maybe it's just you that Donald Trump ought to be in jail right now, you know who co-signed that exact sentiment that you just expressed in that clip? Judge Tanya Chutkan. Now, I think we've talked about this before. I used to try murder cases against Tanya Chutkan back in the day when she was a public defender in the courts of Washington, D.C., and I was a federal homicide prosecutor. We went at it, but I'll tell you, she is not only strong and smart and tactically savvy and fierce, she's trustworthy and honorable. And, I have watched her ever since on the bench. And she is exactly the kind of judge I would expect her to be. And here's what she said, and I can quote her verbatim, because when I was last in her courtroom, when they were arguing the Trump gag order up front, she said to Trump's lawyer, if it was any other defendant on pretrial release in a felony case, and the defendant said that the prosecutor handling his case was a deranged thug, that person would be in pretrial detention. She spoke the truth, but it was also so damn disheartening because she also highlighted the unequal application of the law. On the upside, I see Fani Willis prodding that great beast, the law, into wakefulness, and she's using it right now appropriately on defendant Harrison Floyd. But I have to believe if there are some things that Donald Trump says and does and posts that violates his conditions of release in Georgia, I think she will unflinchingly go after Trump the way we saw her today go after defendant Harrison Floyd.
I would say this, and I want to kind of try to think about this from 30,000 feet, because what are we really getting at? If Trump was any other person, right? Well, but he's not any other person, and therein lies the problem, right? And there are two levels at which he's not any other person. First of all, I mean, look, if I could, die and go to heaven, be sent back, send me back as a rich white man, right? Because clearly there's a different set of rules that apply, and I would like to just take that out for a spin. Right? That's obvious. I think the racial disparity in our justice system, Donald Trump has put that in front of our faces pretty much since he came down the escalator in 2015. But there's this other aspect where he's not just any other person. He is the presumptive Republican nominee for president of the United States, right? He is the presumptive leader of an entire political party. And the justice system isn't really designed, right, to hold accountable political leaders of that magnitude, right? That's not really why we have the courts. That's not really why any country has the courts, right? We use a democracy. We're supposed to do this through voting. Other countries, they use the military. They use juntas. They use, guns and arms to deal with their kind of rebellious, traitorous political figures. No country really relies on unelected, unaccountable, unarmed judges to do this work. And so we're trying to kind of shoehorn Trump into a rule of law that, quite frankly, not just because he's a rich white man, but because he's a important political candidate, just wasn't really made for him. And so not only are we seeing this in the justice system, I would also like to point out that the problem that the justice system is having right now, specifically with regard to the gag order, specifically with regards to the threats that he's making against federal officials, this is the same problem the mainstream media has had with Trump from the jump, from 2015, right, from 2012. The media, the institutions, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they have never understood really how to handle such a clear, present, and obvious threat to American democratic institutions, right? They've still never figured out how to cover Trump effectively without promoting Trump's lies and disinformation and violence, right? So the media as an institution has failed to kind of get this guy under wraps. The political institutions, obviously within the Republican Party, a complete and utter failure to keep him together. And now we're seeing the same problem happen again in the judicial system. It's a common thread here. And that common thread is that we don't know how to handle our would-be dictators because we basically have never had to deal with it before.
But we've been here before, Tom. I mean, it's not like we haven't danced with fascism and white nationalism in this country before. It's not like we haven't had social and political leaders who dabbled in this space. I give you Henry Ford. I give you Charles Lindbergh. How is that different? The fascism that allowed the Nazis to hold a big festival in Madison Square Garden with thousands of people, it ran out of room, to where we are today. Why is this so difficult? We were able to deal with it then. Why can't we seemingly deal with it now?
I'm going to throw a flag here and say a couple of things. One, I think that is going to be a little controversial. I actually think the 1939 rally, that tape's been going around, people in 1939, hiling. In some ways, that's actually less dangerous because it was a small movement and it was clearly identified with the Nazis. This is almost more dangerous that you have this kind of amorphous, kind of cultish thing that is spreading to millions of people that they are not going to be able to climb down from. And I think Elie was getting to the right problem here, which is that this is different because our system makes room for people to go be fascists and play dress up and go to Madison Square Garden and Heil Hitler.
Right.
Our system is not designed to take someone who is running for office, has already sworn to support and defend the Constitution, and is now using every mechanism of the law and the Constitution against us, because and I think Americans, because we've become a very legalistic and litigious society, we think black letter law governs everything, right? I'm not a lawyer, speaking as a political scientist, observer, but we've come to believe that, well, if you write it down and it's in the law, that solves things. The problem is that so much of American law and the Constitution itself is based on agreements. It's based on norms. It's based on traditions and beliefs that aren't written down. And so Trump has figured out how to just stomp on all of this while making everybody else have to obey the rules in good faith. That's where everybody gets tripped up. That's where the journalists get tripped up. That's where the judges get tripped up.
Well put.
That's where the lawyers get tripped up. They say we are the guardians of the media fairness and honesty and openness and transparency. And the lawyers, we are officers of the court. We respect the constitutions. And the judges are saying impartial justice. And you have a guy basically just lighting wastebasket fires everywhere saying, no, that's your thing. My thing is to take all that stuff and bend it absolutely until it breaks. And this, I guess this is where I keep shuddering about James Madison's warning. And I brought this up so many times when people ask about the constitutional barriers, because I wasn't a big fan of the attempt to rule him out with the 14th Amendment.
Right. See in Colorado,
When Madison was asked about this and asked if the checks and balances were sufficient, he basically said, look, if we're not decent people, nothing will work. He said, is there no virtue among us? If not, then we are in a wretched condition. I think that's what's happened.
That's kind of akin to what Ben Franklin said when he was asked about what they had done. And he said, well, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. Idea, the onus is on the American people. So
wait, I want to, before
go ahead. No, I was going to say, go ahead, Elie.
Yeah, I want to back that up because one of the analogies that I like to use to explain Trump is like a cancer. I don't mean that in a kind of a snarky way. Right. I mean, think about how cancer actually works. It hijacks the reproductive structures of the cells to propagate itself, right? And that's how it gets out of control, because it hijacks how the thing is supposed to work and perverts it, right? And that's what Trump is doing with our system. How do you get rid of cancer? And the answer, one of the reasons why we don't have a cure is that our best answer right now is to cut it out, and to cut out good things, good cells, good tissue, useful, right, vital organs with it. In order to get rid of the cancer, you have to full body radiate yourself, right? You have to take out a lung. You have to take out parts of your liver to get rid of the cancer. And the thing that Trump, to back up what Tom is saying, has figured out is that we don't want to cut. We don't want to radiate, right? We don't want to throw good parts of our system and, quite frankly, good parts of ourselves out, Michael, in order to get at him.
One last comment to piggyback on that, and that is, everyone else is playing by those rules and guarding those norms and laws, because for all of us, there will come another day. We are trying to preserve something for the future. Trump has no past and no future. He lives in the moment. If destroying all of this is Elie's point about not cutting out the healthy tissue. We don't want to do any of these things and become like Trump, right? To say, well, we'll just lock him up. I get this from people, resistance Twitter and other people say, why can't we just lock him up? Well, because then we're him. Then he has succeeded in destroying all the guardrails, and he has gotten us to do it for him. We're the ones that are trying to say there will come a day after Trump, and the Constitution must survive until that day.
So Glenn, where do we go, bro? I mean, how do you then, using the gag order scenario that we're currently finding ourselves in, and what both Elie and Tom have put on the table, as I just think that's an incredible bookend to understanding the moment. What happens is this gag order then part of the violation of the First Amendment, to the extent that we now have to cut out the First Amendment in order to, you see where you see the box Michael, that we put in?
The gag order, to extend Elie's cancer analogy, the gag order is kind of like treating lung cancer by telling the patient, just stop smoking. It's all going to be okay. Gotcha. And I don't know how much good tissue we really need to cut out. There's so much bad tissue, including the insurrectionists in Congress. And I would like to say, how do we often claim we can fix these problems? We got to get to the polls and do what? Vote out the bums. We got to vote out the bums. Well, when you have bums who are unwilling to accept the results of free and fair elections, it makes voting out the bums a lot harder. When you have state legislatures who are, they're either gerrymandering or they're passing voter suppression laws, or it makes voting out the bums, not the be all and end all. I lay this at the feet of the failures of the good people to assert the rule of law the way it was intended to be asserted. Listen, I was inside the Department of Justice for decades. I can attest to the fact that we have far more good people than bad, far more honorable people than dishonorable, people who really are there doing the hard work of the American people. But the problem is, because maybe it's unprecedented, we're not really used to grabbing hold of the ruling class criminals, whether they be political or big oil or big tech or big pharma. We're not used to grabbing hold of them, applying the law equally to them the way we do to the carjackers and the purse snatchers, and holding them accountable for their crimes. Do you know, we could have, just as Bob Mueller said in his testimony, Donald Trump could be indicted the day he leaves office, right? All we had to do, Michael, all the federal prosecutors had to do was take volume 2 of the Trump-Russia report, slap a face sheet on it. What's a face sheet? It's what we put on top of an affidavit in support of an arrest warrant, and we walk into a judge's chambers and we say, Your Honor, we not only have probable cause to arrest Donald Trump, we've got proof beyond a reasonable doubt in this document alone, and that's just for openers. And we could have charged him on January 7th, or if some people want to indulge the lunacy that you can't indict a sitting president, we could have waited until after Joe Biden was sworn in on January 20th, and we could have gotten an arrest warrant for him, an indictment for him. He would already be serving life without. But we failed to apply the rule of law. And it is the good people of the Department of Justice who failed to apply the rule of law as it was intended to be applied. That's why we're here, because now we seem to be paralyzed. Donald Trump is probably the single most dangerous pretrial defendant in our nation at this point. And you know what the law says? The law says that if you are charged in a felony case, he's charged in 4 felony cases. The man's being prosecuted up and down the eastern seaboard. Right. If you are charged in a felony case and there's clear and convincing evidence that you pose a danger to even a single other person or a member of the community, you should be detained pending trial. That's what you articulated, Michael. It's what Judge Chutkan articulated, but we flat out refuse to do it. It is the good people who are just, too timid, too scared, too averse to criticism. I don't know.
That begs the question, what the hell's wrong with the good people?
Well, I mean,
I think they're scared. Glenn, I think they're scared. But also, many of those folks, I was a federal employee for years. Some of the most principled and, best people I ever knew were my coworkers. I think it's not just scared, although it's that. I think that, it's nobody wants to be the one to finally say, look, this guy's under arrest. He just, because he is a former president, because he is a national figure, they forget that he's just an outer borough mook making threats against, against witnesses. But there's also the problem, I think, of I've kind of railed about this in a few pieces where it's a normalcy bias. It's like, we can't possibly be thinking about putting a former president of the United States in jail, right? We can't, it's so unimaginable. And Michael, you asked this question a minute ago about, why even those barons of, and titans of industry and the others that kind of slip the noose, and just in the barbershop mode, just to bring a little humor back, Elie, when you were talking about this, all I could think of was Eddie Murphy's classic SNL skit where he walks around as a white guy.
White like me.
It was so, You don't have to pay for that. Just take it.
I found out that when alone, white people give things to each other.
But I think there's also this kind of sense of just complete disbelief that you're going to have to do this, and I think people can't get past that disbelief about, you know, just bringing charges and putting the guy behind bars for doing things that any of us would have gone to jail for. And I'm not sure how you get around that, but I think the first people that have to get over it are people in the media. Because if I see one more headline that says something like, Donald Trump has an interesting theory of government, you know, I'm just going to have an aneurysm.
You're setting up the next place I want to go to, but Elie, I think you had something you wanted to put a coda on this.
Yeah, you guys are being super nice. I hate the man named Merrick Garland. That's the problem behind
I knew
this.
You were going there.
Right? And just like as a little inside,
I knew Elie was going there.
Right? And just as a little inside baseball, like I actually had for The Nation a whole post ready to go on the day that Biden was to announce Merrick Garland as his AG pick, about how Merrick Garland was absolutely the wrong guy for the job at this moment, that his reticence, that his judicial temperament was the wrong temperament we needed right now. We needed a real prosecutor. That post was set to go up, I kid you not, January 6th, 2021, because that was the day Biden was going to make that announcement. So I am basically hovering over the publish button as I'm watching January 6th unfold, and I'm like, oh, I can't publish that. Like it's a whole new thing. Right. And so I think part of the reason, like I'm not even being facetious. I think part of the reason that Trump was not arrested and there weren't more calls to have him arrested on January 21st, the day after Biden was inaugurated, was because of the events of January 6th and this feeling that like the world had changed, and the feeling that like maybe we would all kind of come to our senses after January 6th. And so then, to get to Tom's point, this humongous, big, weighty thing of arresting a former president of the United States, well, maybe that never needed to happen because his movement had been so exposed as traitors on January 6th that it would never be actually, that it would kind of fizzle out after that.
Right.
Obviously, that didn't happen that way. And so I go back to Merrick Garland being the kind of absolutely wrong guy for the job.
So you Tom, put your finger on a very interesting button that I want to push at the moment, because I also put out on the street my feelings about where we are right now and why we're here. And to be honest, like, as I just really sick and tired of this sort of BS equivalency between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, as if these two men are exactly the same. The whole age argument, I'm beyond done with. But I came across this clip that my buddy Heath Mayo had posted, and I had to respond to, by William F. Buckley, no slouch, William F. Buckley, who I thought nailed the moment of why there's a difference between a Donald Trump and a Joe Biden.
What evidence have we that the Soviet Union has in fact adjourned its intentions to rule the world? We are trapped by the notion that we're both superpowers. Why don't we do this when they do that? But they have been the aggressors. It is written into their charter that they are the aggressors. To say that we in the Soviet Union are to be compared is the equivalent of saying that the man who pushes the old lady into the way of an oncoming bus and the man who pushes the old lady out of the way of an oncoming bus are both people who push old ladies around.
That nailed it for me. And that's really these two gentlemen, the Soviet U.S. Examples, comparisons aside, you have this environment that plays into everything that we've said that now leads to the idea among a lot of Americans that are, of course, showing polling of Donald Trump kicking Joe Biden's ass in 5 out of 6 battleground states, 5 out of 6. And the one where Joe Biden is leading, I believe it was Wisconsin, he's up by 2 points. And so it is this false equivalency of the guy who has been accused of and found convicted of sexual abuse of women versus the guy who's trying to fight for their bodily rights. And yet they're both seen as the same thing. Help us understand what that's all about.
Because they keep framing it as Democrats and Republicans. There are Republicans somewhere, but they're not Trump. Trump is his own thing. And the part of the Republican Party that he controls, which is the majority, is a cult. It's a cult of personality. And he himself, as I wrote last week, I think cannot be described as anything but a fascist. And yet, well, here, let me throw this into the mix. Just today, Peter Major. Well, I got to support Trump because, you know, the Democrats, because, you know, Republicans have some problems. Democrats have some problems. It's insane. It's like, it's this insane comparison between a party that is led by a delusional wannabe fascist and a normal, if dysfunctional, occasionally wrong party that is, you know, perfectly normal American political party. But as long as we keep phrasing it as, well, it's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's two candidates, they're both similar, they're old men, they have just, you know, and again, we get those headlines, right? Trump disagree, Biden must make the case for his economic plan against Trump's economic plan, as if any of this election is going to be about policy at all. Right. It's an election about the future of democracy. And we're talking about it as like, yes, but, you know, will there be CPI indexing in the 2027 tax? You know, who cares?
I think that's absolutely right. But I mean, it goes to tribalism. I mean, like, that's always been a part of it. And like, if we're getting in the shop, if we're getting real, if we want to be truthful about the whole matter, I think we all know that there is a vested interest in lots of corporate media to have Trump both, if not become president again, certainly be as relevant for as long as possible, because he drives ratings, because he drives clicks, because he drives subscriptions, because Trump is news. And in that kind of way that, like, you know, you're eating popcorn, you're like, oh my God, what is Trump going to do next? Like, he gets eyeballs to the screen. I feel this in my own life. Joe Biden promised that if he was president, you wouldn't have to think about him every day. And you know what? I don't think about Joe Biden every day. I go back and deal with my life. I talk to my kids. I've got I have issues, right? But Trump shows up on the screen. Trump shows up on the screen doing something, being mean to somebody, about to, you know, talking about, you know, Hitler and Nazism, right? And suddenly I'm right back in front of the TV. Oh my God, what did he say? What did he say? Oh my God, this guy. Right? Like, so I fall.
My wife said to me, "Did you watch
that? I'm criticizing, but I don't have money invested in it." If you're CNN, if you're, you know, the Washington Post, you've got money invested in keeping the race close, keeping the race even, keeping the race interesting, and keeping Trump, this, you know, this Svengali of ratings, in the mix. And I think that's a big part of why the media covers him the way that they do.
My wife said to me the other day, did you see Biden's press conference? And I went, was Biden having a press conference? And for once I was like, oh my God, what a relief not to know.
Why would I watch that?
The president said, I'm like, okay, I'll go check it out. I'll find it online. I'm gonna, you know, I want to see what he said about, you know, but I'm like, I always knew when Trump was gonna have a presser, because he was gonna say something terrifying and horrible, and of course I was gonna watch it.
Glenn, is it like that from your conversations with your friends inside of law enforcement still? Because there is sort of a difference between when Trump was at the podium versus Biden at the podium now, to both points about, did you see Biden's press conference? Did you hear the administration did X, Y, and Z? Now, the backside of that can be, you know, how well or not well the administration, the current administration, tells its story, and we can talk about why that feeds some of the news narratives around Biden and his poll numbers. But inside the various agencies that have been buffeted by Trump, this has got to be peace and calm in one sense. They're actually doing the rule of law thing. They're not on the defensive, watching the attorney general get grilled or skewered by the president.
Yeah, I think the majority of DOJ employees were deeply troubled and embarrassed during the Trump years. And I guess I lived a hopelessly naive, 30 years as a federal prosecutor, Michael, because in my former office, the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, we usually had about 350 prosecutors, lots of attrition. So over a couple of decades, I served with lots and lots and lots of federal prosecutors. I didn't know what their politics were, any of them. There were one or two outliers who kind of wore it on their sleeves, but I didn't know what their politics were. We didn't care. We didn't make political decisions. I would say even my friends in the fraud and public corruption section were just kind of sawing the wood in front of them based on the facts and the law, not based on politics. And then when Trump came in and corrupted and weaponized the Department of Justice, courtesy of Bill Barr, for the most part, and used the rule of law to punish his enemies and reward his criminal associates. I had friends that I served with, including some of my own homicide prosecutors, not only quit cases like the Roger Stone case, but leave the Department of Justice, leave their career or potential career behind because they were not going to be part of what Donald Trump and Bill Barr did to the Department of Justice. So now, in one sense, the waters should be a little bit more calm, but now, they've got their hands full with prosecuting 1,200 and counting insurrection cases. And I guess they're not spending much time going after the insurrectionists in Congress. So they ought to have a little bit of free time on their hands, because they're, and here's, going to Elie's point about Merrick Garland. A couple of things trouble me so deeply right now. The fact that all of the crimes Donald Trump committed while in office, for which he could have been indicted the late day he left office, basic things that a novice prosecutor could prove in their sleep, like bribery and extortion of a world leader using our taxpayer dollars, congressional funds, to extort a dirty political favor out of a fellow world leader. We have now set the precedent. DOJ has given permission to the next aspiring dictator to do that all over again with impunity because they opted not to hold Donald Trump accountable for it. And then the insurrectionists in Congress, Michael, we have people serving in Congress who asked for pardons because they knew they committed crimes on and around January 6th. They wanted to get away with those crimes, and we are letting them continue to kill us from within. How in the hell can that be? And one more thing, I don't want to. I can't rant the way Elie does. I get tired. I lose my wind. But here's the other thing. Again, politically, I'm naive. But how can there only be two patriots who were willing to say the viability of our democracy is more important than my reelection? How can there only be Cheney and Kinzinger? I wish somebody could explain that to me.
I'm 100% with you. But
speaking of Bill Barr, part of this problem goes on television, sits down, people interview him. So tell us what you think about Trump, as if he had no role in any of this, and just walks right back in and says, "Oh, our special guest is, we're talking." And I find myself yelling at the TV, ask him these questions. But Glenn, when you were talking about this, I thought of this point about Garland, that it's that sense of, well, if I have to protect all these norms for some later date. And the thing that keeps going through my head when I think of this is, since we all brought up Lincoln earlier, it was Lincoln talking about habeas corpus, saying, are all the laws to go unobserved but one at this point? And that quote keeps flashing through my mind every time. I'm torn. I want an attorney general who says, look, I'm not just going to tear the place apart and start jailing people willing. On the other hand, are all the laws to go unobserved but one?
The media in particular has a real difficulty covering the law because of what we're talking about. And because the law is by its nature an adversarial system, right? The whole point of our legal, and it's not like this everywhere else, like in Singapore, there is no adversarial system. The government says you did it, and you have the right to be like, no, and then you get caned, right? Like that's how they roll. Right? In our country, you can always make a legal argument, right? You can always have a defense. You can always say something legal sounding in the face of the government. The media is terrible at understanding whether or not that legal argument that you're allowed to make is a good one. Like most publications, most journalist organizations don't have the kind of just legal acumen to be able to distinguish what a good argument is from a bad argument. And so they devolve into basically prestige whoring and prestige running. So like, well, Alan Dershowitz said it, so it must be a good argument. No. It's been a while since Alan Dershowitz could chew that leather, right? But we don't have a way. It's been like this. If the media covered law the way it covered finance reporters wouldn't be able to add. All right, like that's how bad the media is at covering these different legal arguments. So Trump can throw stuff against the wall, and the media doesn't have the skills to be like, Trump made a ridiculous First Amendment argument today. Right? Trump argued that he had executive privilege. He doesn't today. Like, they don't do that. And so it kind of gets thrown into this mud of like, well, and it goes back to Tom's point. Well, two options, he's one option among many, right? Abortions for some, tiny American flags for others. That's how the media covers it.
Michael, thank you for having me here, because it's nice to be in an environment where I am not the most angry guy on the panel all the time.
I love it.
I agreed with what Elie just said, because I just don't understand, and I keep wondering who the constituency or the readership for this is to say, hey, if we call out what Trump said as a totally inane legal theory, then what? All the MAGA subscribers are gonna stop reading the New York Times. Gonna stop reading. Yes. I always think of that thing Jesse Helms said. This when I worked in the Senate, I heard this possibly apocryphal, but I heard his real story, where the New York Times criticized Helms, and one of his staffers wanted to write a response, and Helms said, well, you can go ahead and do that if you want, son. He said, well, I have to tell you something. I don't read the New York Times, and nobody I know reads the New York Times.
Right.
And it's like, I keep wanting to say, who are you worried about alienating by being honest about this?
It's one of the reasons why in the nation I spend a lot of times criticizing Democrats, criticizing Merrick Garland, whatever, because Democrats the ones who are reading the Nation, right? No, I'm not writing a Nation column to convince Joe Manchin voters in West Virginia's they ain't reading me, right? They're not the ones listening, right? So you have to have some kind of understanding of your actual audience. And the Times, CNN, they seem to just not have that. And so I agree with Tom. Like, I wonder which tech bro financier they're actually worried about pissing off, because it ain't Republican voters. They ain't reading.
Well, I want to put a pin in that, because both you and Tom have written pieces that I want to get to that were clearly not written for the audience in which the publication occurred. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more with Elie, Glenn, and Tom right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to Michael Steele Podcast. I'm so excited. I'm getting a slimmed and trimmed because Thanksgiving's here. I got a lot to be thankful for. To have my friends joining us this afternoon here at the Michael Steele Podcast. Tom Nichols, Elie Mystal, and Glenn Kirschner. Welcome, gentlemen, again, and thank you for that inspiring send off to break. It was a good one. So since you raised the point, Elie, I want to talk to you about your piece in the Nation, which I thank you. I totally got where you were going with this. The headline is "Goodbye, Joe Manchin. We won't miss you." And tell us in your words why we won't miss Joe Manchin, and why Democrats at the end of the day are better off. Because Tom, I'm coming to you next on your piece in the Atlantic. which we touched on a little bit in the beginning of our conversation. But Elie, what's the deal with Manchin, and why do the Democrats fret so?
Democrats need to stop wetting the bed every time, there's something goes bump in the night. And Joe Manchin retiring is a bump in the night. I get that the Democrats have a very difficult chance to hang on to the Senate. I get that you can only lose one of West Virginia, Arizona, Montana, or Ohio. You can only lose one, and Manchin not running means that one is likely going to be West Virginia. But here's the thing. Manchin was always gonna lose West Virginia. Jim Justice, the current Republican governor of West Virginia, is running for that Senate seat, and he's been whooping Manchin all up and down from Huntington to Wheeling. He's been whooping Manchin, right? So like there was never a chance we were gonna hang on to that seat. So once you understand that, look at the party as a whole. And one of the things that Joe Manchin has done in his almost 15 years in the Senate is weaken almost every Democratic bill that required Joe Manchin's signature, right? He weakened the Build Back Better plan and then didn't vote for it. He refused to vote for the People Act, which would have restored voting rights to many Americans. He has been against every single piece of environmental legislation for 15 years. This guy has not been your friend. I agree that we needed his vote, but once you understand that we weren't going to have his votes anyway, it is better off for the Democrats to just try to win the Senate without him, because we were going to have to do it anyway. And here's my other point: to try running actual Democrats in red states as opposed to light Republicans in red states. Yeah. Is it hard? Yes, but there are victories. Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, right? He ran as a Democrat, a more moderate Democrat than me.
Well,
right?
Joe Shapiro, Pennsylvania. Look at
right?
Shapiro. Yeah,
Shapiro ran as governor of Pennsylvania as a Democrat. I mean, moderate Democrat, but as a Democrat. John Tester in Montana runs as a Democrat, right? Not a Joe Manchin type Democrat, but a conservative, Joe Biden as a Democrat, and wins. So it's possible to win as a Democrat without suffocating the country in greenhouse emissions because you're actually a coal lobbyist running out of West Virginia. So I'm not worried about Manchin I'm worried about holding on to the Senate. I'm not worried about Manchin going. Goodbye, Joe Manchin. And look, Manchin was going to lose by 20 points. You know who else could lose by 20 points? Some county commissioner from Wheeling, West Virginia, who's running on a single issue, women's reproductive rights, right? Like that abortion issue has real valence in this election, in the last election, every election since Dobbs. Run a single issue campaign on women's reproductive rights in West Virginia and have her lose by 20 points. At least she'll do it with dignity, unlike Joe Manchin.
There you are. So boom, boom. Hey, Tom, so you wrote a piece in the Atlantic, which was an interesting. I love the title. Trump crosses a crucial line. I love this paragraph. You say, I dug in my heels when Donald Trump's critics described him and his followers as fascists. Authoritarians, yes, some. Liberal, definitely. But fascism, a term coined by Benito Mussolini and now commonly used to describe Italy, Germany, and other nations in the 1930s, has a distinct meaning and denotes a form of government that is beyond undemocratic. So, why now? Why do you think he is now?
Because, well, first of all, as I also noted in the piece, I am an insufferable pedant, which comes from, 35 years of being a college teacher. I used to teach courses on authoritarian systems and what fascism meant, and it's always griped me, not just when I was a conservative and a Reaganite and all that, not just as an academic, that everything is fascism, that Nixon's a fascist and Bush is a fascist and this and that. That word to me is radioactive. I mean, it's a really important word, and when you use it, it's, I mean, it's like the word terrorism. Everything you don't like isn't terrorism. If you pull the string on terrorism, you're pulling the string on a lot of stuff that you're about to do that could get really ugly. So you better know what you're talking about when you use words like that. So why now? The Vermin speech, I think, really did it for me. Where, it's one thing to go on, as you said earlier, Michael, we've had plenty of nativist, isolationist, America firsters. But when you're talking about your fellow citizens and saying, we're going to root out these animals, these vermin within us, within our society, I think that was kind of the last piece where I said, this really is that, I am the state will only be me, all power will be exercised through me, and I will target every part of this society that even remotely annoys me. Because let's face it, let's face an important reality. Donald Trump, when he went on about Marxists and communists and fascists and this and that, he doesn't understand any of those words. All of those words are a generic term meaning people that don't like Donald Trump.
Yep.
And so to classify them, to add that final step of all your fellow citizens are basically subhumans, except the people in your movement, to me really kind of put that last peg in there. And I said, be careful about calling other people fascists, because the one thing Donald Trump doesn't have, at least yet, is that disciplined and organized movement, a totalistic ideology. I mean, in a way, we're fortunate that this time around, and I say this time around because there's gonna be another time, but this time around, the guy leading this wannabe fascist movement is such an idiot, is so incompetent, and frankly, he's lazy. I'm glad that nobody misunderstood me in the piece, because I said, fascists are actually pretty hardworking. Fascist leaders are pretty hardworking, courageous. You can hate them, but they have a record, all of them, physical bravery, workaholics. Trump is none of that.
It's more than a day job. That's for sure.
More, right. And it's more than a speech in a parking lot in front of a Walmart. But I think when I finally read that, and when you start piecing together all the other stuff he wants to do with his plans for the Justice Department that, Glenn's been talking about, the military, which I'll be writing about next month in the Atlantic. He is trying to put together something that is now recognizably beyond authoritarian or illiberal, and really does come sort of as close to neo-fascism as we've ever seen in America, I think.
So Glenn, just to sort of round out this round robin of points, the country's sort of watched unfold before its eyes these various narratives around a number of members of the Supreme Court and their distorted sense of ethics and their distorted sense of ethical responsibility that has led to this past Monday, the Supreme Court coming out with its own code of ethics. Why don't you get your...
That laugh was not a good sign.
Ellie's like, yay. Happy days are here again. So, Counselor, will it change anything? What do you think the purpose of them sort of putting out what pretty much everyone agrees is a milquetoast response to a very serious problem?
Yeah, it's not so much a code of ethics as it is a pamphlet of suggestions. And Michael, I actually wrote a piece too, but it's my shopping list for Thanksgiving, so you probably don't want me to read it.
Right.
So look, the code of ethics is laughable. Listen, the Supreme Court justices, a certain block of them, enjoy being above the law. They enjoy getting money and trips and RVs lavished on them by billionaire donors who will undoubtedly have business before the court. And so I love when Chief Justice Roberts said, we've always been hyper ethical. The people just didn't understand it. So we had to put this pamphlet out explaining just how ethical we are. So I'm glad that we were able to clear that up for you. But my favorite part is all of it is really just a suggestion. The justices should, avoid, financial entanglements. The justices should, not that they shall, not that they must. Well, you know what? The code of ethics should have some damn mandatory requirements in there. It should include the word shall. There should be an enforcement mechanism, and there should be punishment, penalties for violations of the code. I mean, it really is the stuff of a Saturday Night Live skit. It's just, it's absurd, and it reinforces that they love being above the law, and they're not going to do anything to knock themselves down a peg. But here is I have confidence in the Supreme Court, Michael, in one regard. I think they will forever be motivated by self-preservation. And what I mean by that is I actually don't think they're going to accept review of any case or review and decide any case that will facilitate Donald Trump returning to the Oval Office. Because if they do, they will be, working to install an aspiring dictator in the Oval Office. And the one thing an aspiring dictator has no interest in, it's a Supreme Court. And he will do everything he can to knock them down and marginalize them. And so just as they didn't accept review of any of the election challenge cases, I don't think they're going to go with this insane absolute immunity claim or double jeopardy claim. These things, as I'm sure Elie could tell you, are so laughable. I think they're going to let the March 4 trial, let's all cross our fingers and toes that jury selection starts on March 4. I think they're going to let the March 4 trial proceed apace. And because, Donald Trump and y'all were talking about this a few minutes ago, all the nonsense he spouts about the Presidential Records Act lets me do it, and I can declassify things with my mind. None of it is true, and none of it is admissible in court. So once the rules of evidence are applied to, what Donald Trump actually is alleged to have done, the jury will convict him so fast it will make, his head spin. And then I have enough faith in Judge Chutkan. I don't believe it's misplaced faith that she will, one, sentence him to prison, and two, will absolutely not leave him on release pending appeal. That is my hope, and that is my expectation, and I sure hope I'm not wrong in that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Tom.
And Glenn, can I ask you a question? Because I'm not a Supreme. By the way, I want that code of ethics. I should pay my taxes. But Glenn, except for what I know as a layman about like Abe Fortas, right? I mean, it seems like Fortas was a minuscule version, got bounced for doing, a tenth of this. But was the court always like this? I mean, were these guys in the modern era, were they all just doing this and now we just know? I mean, I hope, and my sense is that the whole Fortas business says that no, in 1965, if you were doing this kind of stuff, you got called out and you had to leave. I mean, is this court just worse? Or
my speculation, and I'm looking forward to Elie's answer to that question more than my own answer. My speculation is no, it has gotten significantly worse in the modern era, but who knows? We don't know what we don't know. So maybe, this kind of grift and conflict of interest has been going on all along, but they were just either better at keeping it hid, or the press was a little bit kinder and gentler and gave the ruling class criminals the leeway that some people thought they deserved.
It depends, Tom, on what you're talking about what this is. If you're talking
like the
about
Clarence Thomas stuff.
Right. So if you're talking about a Nazi memorabilia collector buying your mama's house, that's just Clarence. That's a special kind of corrupt that Clarence Thomas is showing us today. But if you're talking about the softer peddling of influence, right? I'm gonna go take a trip. I'm a rich person. I'm gonna take a trip with this rich person. Maybe we'll talk about the tax code. Who can tell we're fishing? That's been happening forever, right? And this ethics code, to the extent that it is a code, doesn't prevent any of that from happening going forward. Abe Fortas, who you bring up, remember, the only way to remove a Supreme Court justice is through the constitutional powers of impeachment, just like the president, just like any federal official. And that's what Abe was looking at. Yeah. Abe left because Abe was about to get his ass impeached by Congress, right? And still today, the only way to rein in the Supreme Court is through the constitutional impeachment process that starts in Congress and has to be voted on by 2/3 of the Senate. And you can tell the justices, especially in the wake of Trump getting off twice, you can tell the justices are just simply not concerned that Congress.
But I mean, there was shame. There was the guardrail of shame at some point. I mean, this is Trump's real innovation in politics. So he's completely excised the role of shame or shunning or self-awareness out of politics. But I just have to believe that there was a time when, besides the threat of impeachment, that there were guys sitting on the Supreme Court saying, if this guy buys my mom's house, this is going to look bad.
So I think that's right. I think that the Supreme Court used to be motivated by a sense of shame, but you also have to remember the Supreme Court used to not think that it had the right to do any of this stuff in terms of its political machinations within our polity, right? The Supreme Court used to be far more, dare I say, and this will be the second William Buckley frickin' reference of the podcast, dare I say, more restrained. Right? Like used to be what the Supreme Court was about. It's really only since, I would argue, 2000s, only since the Supreme Court picked the president that they felt quite so emboldened to meddle in our politics. And that's where I was kind of slightly disagreeing with what Glenn said. I completely agree with Glenn that I do not think the Supreme Court will meddle in the Trump trials. But where I worry is that, look, the Supreme Court was very strong against the first coup, right? Because it's very hard to throw away votes that have been counted. But as I just brought up with Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court has already in the past decided that some votes shouldn't be counted at all. And if the second coup, if it's not a clown coup, if they're thinking about it better this time, where I worry is how Trump and his comrades will try to stop votes from being counted at all, and what this Supreme Court says about that. That's where I don't have a lot of confidence in this court.
But Elie, don't you think neither Bush nor Gore were aspiring dictators the way Trump is? And it's because of the Supreme Court's, sense of self and self-preservation above all else that I'm not saying they're not going to meddle. I agree with you. But I just don't think they're going to be inclined to meddle in favor of an aspiring dictator.
I think that's right, and I also think that you have to add in the fact, and again, I'm not speaking ill of the environment man, but you have to also remember that Al Gore didn't fight it. That Al Gore was kind of really into following he didn't want to seem like a sore loser, right? And here's a point that I've made before, if Joe Biden, as sitting president, is sitting there watching them try to boat shoe rally the election away, Biden's gonna fight for it in a way that Gore didn't, and that's gonna put more pressure on the Supreme Court in the way that Gore didn't. And so I think that could also help.
But it is an interesting point that Glenn's bringing up, that they don't have that. It's in their interest not to support the guy who says, and if I win, the first thing I'll do is to make sure that none of your decisions ever matter again.
Right.
And like that, all I need is one decision from you, and then you can all go home.
Yep.
So gentlemen,
Gorsuch will probably go for it because he's a nihilist, but Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett is still, I think, gettable on some of these issues. And then Brett Kavanaugh, he's such a weak individual that he kind of goes with whoever seems to be strongest at the time. So I don't think they have 5 votes for. I don't think they have 5 votes for the coup. They certainly don't have 5 votes for a coup if it's going to look like it did last time.
Well, and Elena Kagan did note that there were significant disagreements among the justices on how they should do this process. Now, they eventually got to, I guess, some level of agreement, but clearly not all the justices were down with what came out. Yeah. So
look, Kagan is also Kagan is the one person on the court that I truly think is beyond reproach. If you will indulge me a quick Kagan story, because I had her in law school and she was the dean my third year of law school. So apocryphally, she was a smoker. And practically, I was a smoker. So I meet her, I bump into her when she's the dean of Harvard Law School, I'm buying a pack of cigarettes, and she's behind me in line. So I cheekily offer to buy her a pack of cigarettes, trying to see if the rumor is true that she's an actual smoker. And she says, I will never forget this, Mr. Mystal, would you buy a pack of cigarettes for anybody in this store? Or are you only offering to do it because I'm your law dean? And if so, perhaps you should think about your ethical structures. And I was like, wow. Okay.
I just wanted to offer some cigarettes.
Right,
left a little mark right there, didn't it?
The I was like, Elena Kagan is beyond reproach to me.
Oh my gosh. So gentlemen, I have enjoyed this beyond measure here. And as we wind down, I wanna ask you your parting thoughts as we are in this moment of Thanksgiving. And we're about to celebrate in our own personal way the blessings that we have received this past year, and the difficulties that we've had to contend with as well. What's your advice on having conversations with relatives and friends this holiday season that you don't necessarily see eye to eye with, whether it's on politics or whether or not grandma should be allowed to buy the Ferrari? What are your thoughts? Help us put into context what a blessing this Thanksgiving should be for us. I'll start with you, Tom.
My advice to people has always been, when discussing these things, to be calm and to be confident. That confidence, I think, is the thing that really, if you're trying to get through to my hypothetical Uncle Ned that I'm always talking about, that's gonna, you ask him to pass the potatoes, and he says, "Potatoes, you know where they make those? Venezuela, and voting machines, and and you just kind of go, okay." But I think the one thing that does give some of those folks pause is to refuse to engage and to do it confidently and to say, "You're wrong. I think in your heart, you're wrong. I know you're wrong, and we're not going to discuss it. I'm not doing this. Now pass the goddamn potatoes." Because I think that so much of this has become kind of, this vampirism, of like the people who support Trump just want to engage and suck the energy out of you for hours at a time. And I think, to say, I'm not being this way because I think because I want to fight with you. I just know you're wrong, and I'm not fighting with you about this because I wouldn't fight with you about whether the earth is flat. And just let it go. You're wrong. You're wrong, and I'm not going to explain why. It wouldn't matter. Because they'll say, well, why do you think? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You just are. And I would just, I think that saves your sanity. I think it gives relief to everybody else in the room. And maybe for just 10 seconds, Uncle Ned's going to say, am I wrong? He's going to come to the conclusion, no, I'm not wrong. Donald Trump is always right. But if you can just do that for a few seconds, and then to say, look, around the dinner table, pray, smile, love your family. That's all you can do. I mean, because we really do live in a blessed country and in a blessed time.
Yeah.
And I think that confidence is what I would advise to people. Don't get dragged into this. I wrote last week, if they say Biden crime family or Obama, don't come back with Cheeto Jesus. That's what they want. That's what they want you to do. Just let it, just nod and say, I understand.
I understand. Elie, how about you, my friend?
Well, obviously, I slightly disagree with Tom because I am a confrontational MFer, right? Like
that's why I came to you next.
I'll burn down a table. I don't get like I will obviously go at it with just about anybody. But look, my actual advice to people, look, if you've got a Trump cult member in your family, I actually do agree with Tom, because you're not getting through. You don't wake a sleepwalker. That doesn't go anywhere. I wouldn't bother, right? But for people who have people in their families who they think are reasonable, who are not completely into the cult, but still lean towards voting for Trump, or just lean against voting for Biden for many, for whatever flaws.
Right.
I always try to tell people, your people better than anybody. Your family members, your friends and loved ones better than anybody. There's something that they care about. And because Trump, and because of what Trump does, doesn't care about anybody, doesn't respect anybody, doesn't help anybody, find that thing that your family member cares about and explain it from there. Like, explain your votes, explain your passions, explain your whatever from the perspective of that thing that person cares about the most, because I promise you Trump doesn't give a crap about it. Right. And so kind of think about it. And that way, that's always been my approach. One of my big tricks, right, is to kind of walk people through Roe v. Wade, but not by saying Roe v. Wade, by talking about, I mean, if you just think about this woman, and all we would want is for her to be able to get an abortion before the fetal viability. And then once the baby can survive outside, then it's off the table. But before, and then eventually they'll be like, that's a good thing. And then I'm like, that's what Roe said, mother. So like, come in under the cover of what these people actually care about, and work your way up from there. If they're not in the cult, if they're in the cult,
if they're in the cult, just have the gin and tonic and pass the gravy with those potatoes.
Pass the rum.
That's right. Glenn, my friend.
Yeah, so this
I really
is a
want to
tough
hear
one,
the
Michael.
prosecutor's answer to this.
I want to hear the prosecutor's answer.
So listen, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So just lock the son of a bitch up for the crimes he committed. But you know, this is kind of hard for me, because my favorite saying, the saying that I had tacked up on the top of my bulletin board. Yes, I had a cork bulletin board with the thumbtacks my whole life in my office. And my favorite saying was, don't look down on a man unless you're going to help him up.
Yeah.
Now, how do I apply that to Trump supporters? How do I apply that to the cult members? That's the hard part, because I think we've all just acknowledged in our own ways, you know, it's really hard to break through the hold that Donald Trump has on these people. And I'm not going to naively say we have to keep trying to work to talk across the divide, because we all know how frustrating and infuriating and pointless that can feel. But the other thing is, when we have people in a cult, we ordinarily try to help extract them from the cult and get them safe, right? And these folks are cult members. I, from time to time, express something that approaches sympathy for so many of the January 6th boots of the insurrection. Why? Because not everybody is a critical thinker. And when they're told by their president, and like it or not, everybody's entitled to accept what the president says and make their life decisions accordingly. When they are told incessantly, like a damn mantra, your vote was stolen, your election was rigged, your favorite president is being taken from you, and if you don't go to the Capitol and fight like hell, you won't have a country anymore. Now go down there and stop the certification, stop the steal. I joined the Army in the 1980s because I was willing to listen to my president, my commander-in-chief, if he told me, Glenn, if you don't go overseas and fight like hell against people that you have no personal beef with, we won't have a country anymore. I like to think I was a critical thinker enough to say that sounds like a lawful order. If it was an unlawful order, I knew as a member of the military, I was duty bound to disobey it. But a lot of these folks who attacked the Capitol don't know that, didn't know that. So the deep injustice that's at play every minute of every day is that these people are being indicted, tried, convicted, and imprisoned, and they deserve to be held accountable for the crimes they committed, even though they were duped into committing those crimes, many of them. But the whole gosh dang command structure of the insurrection is they're out playing golf and they're having fundraisers or going to dinner parties and they're plotting their next coup. So, you know, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, if there's any way you can view folks who are caught in this cult, now, yes, some of them are irredeemable. We know that. But if you can look at them as people who need help, and if there's a way to talk with them that might have a hope of extracting them even 1 degree, I think that's what we keep aspiring to do. And though it's going to be futile and we're going to fail more than we're going to succeed, you know, I think, you know, I understand why some of these folks are sucked into, and you know what, maybe it's as simple as they're sick and tired of going to the polls and they know, look, I just vote for Trump once more, I never have to vote again. So, you know, let's call it a day and let's get him installed as a dictator. I don't know, but happy Thanksgiving, and that's my incoherent ramble, Michael.
There you go. No,
Love
gentlemen, you have shaped us up nicely for this holiday. I am most appreciative of your time, but more importantly, your public service, each one of you, in ways that sometimes don't get appreciated or accounted for. Each of you have been on various points of that front line in the past, but more importantly, you're there now. And in the Marines and military service, they talk about standing on the wall. Well, you don't have to wear a uniform to stand on the wall we need you to stand on right now. And you guys have done that, and certainly, Glenn, in your service to the country and the work you've done at the War College, Tom, and Elie, you're just being a pain in the ass to everybody you need to be a pain in the ass to.
Mean guy on internet, Elie.
I am, as a humble servant, grateful. Gentlemen, thank you. Tom Nichols, Elie Mystal, and Glenn Kirschner. What a way to go into Thanksgiving and to be thankful to have friends like you be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much. That does it for our time together, folks, here at the Michael Steele Podcast. It is always a blessing when you do that download thing. So this holiday, do a lot of that shit, because I need the love. Show the love. But definitely check out the what Glenn is doing over at his podcast, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner, Elie Mystal, and his New York Times bestseller, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. And Tom Nichols, of course, doing the incredible work that he is doing over at The Atlantic, and his work over at the U.S. Naval War College. Gentlemen, all, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, gentlemen.
Happy Thanksgiving,
all right,
guys.
Take care now.